Εξομολογήστε το Κύριο διαγραφός, αλληλούια, ότι στον αιώνα το έλεος αυτού, αλληλούια.
Do you not think that we need to get rid of as much state as possible so we actually go back to community? Because I'd say we haven't been living under a free market system. I think you've still got this welfare state that's splitting our families, which has been going on and worse since the 80s. We've got the state schools, we've been indoctrinating all of the kids. And remember, this is an experiment. This has only been going on for about 100 years. So I think globalisation, free market system is incorrect, because I don't think we've really tried going back to the free market as we had more so in the Victorian era.
No, I think the free market, the problem with the idea of free market politics is that it separates politics from culture. And it says we're going to hand over culture to this thing called the free market. And we're just going to let that market go wherever it wants. But the problem with that is that if you aren't willing to fight for a particular culture, others are. And nature abhors a vacuum. So if you create a vacuum, others will try to fill it. And the Conservatives since Thatcher have put faith almost religiously into the idea of a free market, resultantly abandoning the culture war, and then the left have filled that vacuum and now they dominate the culture. Free market values are not Christian values, and I am not an advocate of free market values. I'm an advocate of Christian values. And Christian values have to be cultivated. They don't just emerge out of nothing. You've got to disciple them. You've got to bring them about.
But isn't the way that all of, the you might say the Christian culture, and I would say our traditional culture, has been destroyed, is through the universities. They've brainwashed millions of people in this country actively to destroy our culture, right? They're doing it in the state schools as well, right? You see all of these impositions upon companies. Oh, you've got to meet these sort of quotas, that sort of quota. All the Equalities Act on top, right? You've got all these government programs pushing this, leftist, neo-socialist, woke, as some people call it, agenda. Isn't this all being pushed along by government, all the think tanks, all of the quangos? So you're saying, they put faith in the free market. Are they just putting faith in what they believe is a free market?
Yeah, but you've kind of proven my point. Since Thatcher, the Conservatives gave up fighting for the culture. The left did not stop fighting for the culture. And now, not only do they control the culture, but they control all of our institutions as well, as you've just identified. And so the free market values have been abandoned, or are being abandoned now, but they're being replaced by militant left-wing values. But that's because the Conservatives stopped fighting for the culture in the first place. So what needs to happen is, and you are right, our traditional values have been destroyed in the world, in this secular, liberal world. But it still exists in the church. You can still access it through the church. So if you want to embrace traditional British culture, then you simply have to engage with Christianity and embrace Christianity full fat, confident, bolshy, complete way of life, total way of being, unashamed, unabashed Christianity, which affects your culture, your customs, your traditions, your doctrines, your values, your aspirations, your beliefs, your prejudices, your hopes, and that is the way that you can access traditional culture. Free market values are not traditional British values. They aren't traditional British values. And so if you think by accessing free market values you're accessing traditional values, you don't actually know what traditional British values are.
I think politically, so I disagree with, I'd say politically, having a free market...
Can I put this on your...
I'd say traditionally having a free market is our political value, but I'd say we then have cultural values that we enforce through our communities, through our villages, our towns, through the schools, right, which you used to have more choice back in the day.
Yeah.
Through our family units. I think we should fight for that through our family units, through actual communities. And I think what's happening is our communities are being pushed out everywhere that governments come in. So I see them as sort of two different fights. I see at first we need to restore liberalism to get to a free market, and within a free market we can then bring back traditional values because we'll actually be fighting on a level playing field.
Right. The problem with your whole analysis is that you mistake liberalism for traditional British values. British values are older than the 1790s. The United Kingdom existed before the 1790s. The idea of the English as a people goes back to Alfred the Great, who is 9th, 8th, I can't remember whether it's 8th, 9th or 10th century. But no, I'm going to finish. And so the idea of British values or traditional values is older than the Enlightenment. But when you appeal to liberalism, you're only appealing to something that is as old as the Enlightenment. And so the Enlightenment isn't British values. The Enlightenment is a distortion of Christian values. It is a deformity of Christian values, and you have to go past the Enlightenment and past liberalism to get to real Christian values. In other words, real values of this island and of its people. And the thing is, what you're trying to do is you don't know enough of the history to identify what is actually traditional British values, because it ain't liberalism.
I disagree. I think the word liberalism was used during the Enlightenment period. However, if you look at our Enlightenment, there are two different Enlightenments, right? There's a real Enlightenment that I believe actually happened in Britain, but can trace itself, it's very subtle because it's actually rooted in our history of freedom. Then there's the Continental Enlightenment, in which it's mostly aesthetics, right? They have, some scientific inventions, but they don't really take up the true spirit of the Enlightenment, which I do think is fundamentally English. You want to talk about the history? We've got our Magna Carta. We've got common law.
Wait, 1 second.
By jury.
Let's go through these one at a time. Magna Carta, when was that?
1215.
So before the Enlightenment.
Yes, that's my point.
Thank you. Next one, common law. That goes back to Alfred the Great,
my point.
Pre-Enlightenment.
Yep.
No, that's my point.
That's my
the
point.
Because this isn't liberalism.
It is. It's
no,
proto-liberalism.
it isn't. It isn't liberalism.
Use the word at the time.
It's not liberalism. It's Christianity. That's the point that I'm trying to get you to see. It's not liberalism. It's Christianity working itself out. The idea of habeas corpus is rooted on the principle of the Amatio Dei. You can't have habeas corpus without Amatio Dei, because you can't justify habeas corpus without Amatio Dei. The idea that kings aren't tyrants only makes sense if you have a God that is above the king, if you have a lawgiver higher than the king. But if you look at the Enlightenment and the kind of politics that was drawn out of the Enlightenment, like, I think it's Thomas Hobbes, I might be wrong, the Leviathan, the Leviathan, or John Locke's The Idea of Liberalism. These believed that the highest authority in human society was the human person themselves.
No.
And yes.
No, because
yes.
what they refer to is putting Hobbes to one side, because Hobbes is very anti-Enlightenment. He's an absolutist, right? He wants the Leviathan, the king that is everything, all of the people. It's very sort of fascist. It's corporate in nature. Everything inside the state, nothing outside of the state. Okay. With Locke, he's looking at natural law, okay, which he sees as given by God and discovered through reason. So there are two conceptions of law. There's law as they consider it over on the continent, right, and most of the rest of the world, where they believe that law is handed down from a judge, from the state. You have to be given permission, right, in order to do anything. And then there's our process of law where we go through inquiry. We have a common law system and we use our reason to look at what is right and wrong, to weigh things up. And if you're a Christian, you would say that reason came from God. And the concept of natural law, which is an ancient principle within our culture.
Within Christian culture? Not when you say
English culture.
Within our culture, what do you mean our? Who's the our there?
English.
The English, right, the Anglo-Saxon.
Because over on the
One second, hold on one second. Anglo-Saxon, right? Well, the pre-Christian Anglo-Saxons didn't have a concept of natural law. Natural law emerges from a Christian milieu. And so you can't escape. No matter how much you... What's your name, bro? Will, nice to meet you, Will.
Or Wilzi.
Wilzi, no matter how much you try, you can't escape the fact that Christianity is the tutor of our culture, is the teacher of our culture.
But this didn't happen on the continent.
No, I'm sorry, that's not true.
They don't have this concept of natural
Yes, they
law
do.
in the same way that we do.
Wait, bro. Have you read the Summa Theologia?
Only little bits.
Right. Thomas Aquinas writes chapter and verse about natural law. Was Thomas Aquinas an Englishman?
No.
Right. So in other words, natural law is something indigenous to the Christian faith, and it isn't unique to English culture.
But it was propagated by English culture, and in terms of being embodied, it is uniquely embodied by the English culture, which I think is what makes our culture special.
No, I disagree. This idea that the English culture is somehow unique and special is just patriotism, silliness, emotionalism. In terms of
you don't get a jury. If you go to France, they don't have a system of common law.
1 second.
If you go to Germany, you literally you have to be given permission. It's
Germany was
free to
similar.
do whatever
Yeah.
you want.
The common law.
So long as
The common law is.
We're just going to ignore this guy because he's being rude. So don't engage with him, or I'll just stop talking to you. So I have no time for trolls. So in terms of natural law, you can't escape the fact that it permeates Catholic theology, and the Catholic Church permeates Europe. So the very fact, and I disagree, by the way, the very idea that no, I'm all right, thank you. The very idea that only the English may have expressed natural law in a unique way, but the idea that only the English had a concept of natural law is just ahistorical gibberish. It's just not historical. The reality is that the Franciscans and the Dominicans, when they went to Latin America, made arguments from natural law to try and protect the natives from the slavery of the Spanish and Portuguese colonialists.
Yeah, but they kept slavery for a much longer time than we did. And
You've missed the point I made entirely.
I'm guessing that you see some small glimmers, because natural law you get through reason. Of course, everywhere in the world, on every single different part of the world, there is going to be, every different culture, there's going to be someone who thinks of some argument related to natural law, using reason, rational inquiry to understand what's right and wrong. Of course, that's our nature as humans. Humans are going to come to that. But in terms of where it's actually expressed, where it's solid, where it's the foundation of
It's
culture,
in the Summa Theologia.
But if you go over to France, you're not going to get a trial by jury.
And I believe...
Don't talk to him.
He's lovely.
He's a Judas.
Why is he a Judas? Why is he a Judas?
30 pieces of silver. Where are they?
Right. So my point to you is that the Summa. I might be wrong here, but I believe that the Summa Theologia predates the Magna Carta. I think the Summa Theologia predates the Magna
I
Carta.
think they're around the same time, because...
Anyway, I mean, someone else can Google that. But my point to you is, like, obviously people can access natural law through reason, but the reason why natural law wasn't resisted in Western constitutions and in Western political thought up until the Enlightenment is because the Christian faith cultivated the idea of natural law and wasn't opposed to the idea of natural law. My point to you is that nothing you can point to about English culture can escape from the all-encompassing tutelage of the church.
I say there are some benefits, but I think if it was an inherent feature of Christianity, right, rather than just being an opening, an optional feature, I think it's an optional feature within Christianity. I think people have different takes upon it. But if it was inherent, a necessary feature of Christianity, I think we would see it as the basis of just about every single country across Europe throughout history. Because we haven't seen that, because we've only really seen that in England. Maybe you can find one or two other countries. I see that as an exception, so I can't see it as it's something inherent to Christianity. What I will give you is Christianity, as opposed to a lot of other religions, does allow that, whereas there are some totalitarian religions
like Islam,
which would not necessarily.
Yeah, there was a Thomas Aquinas of the Islamic world, and he got labelled a deviant and ended up living out his life as a heretic, hated by the wider Muslim population. But let's advance the argument further, because since the West has moved away from Christianity, it's increasingly abandoned a natural law. So now we say unnatural things in the West. We say that gender is fluid and that you can just change your gender based upon subjective impression. We say that homosexual sex is just like natural sex. We say that men can breastfeed and men can have children. We say things like, that the family is just what you imagine it to be, including if it's two women and their collection of cats. These are irrational, unscientific, unnatural statements, and it's a symptom of the fact that the Western world has uncoupled itself from its Christian moorings.
See, I would say, I think it's a symptom of the fact that we've increased the size of government and we've completely moved away from liberalism. Because within a liberal society, people will revert to tradition. So have you ever read Hopper, Hans Hermann Hoppe?
No.
So he's a hardcore libertarian, essentially an anarchist,
yeah.
Right? But in his personal life, super traditional. Because he says, why do people have these traditions? Often because there's a reason for them, they're useful, they work, and when you don't have all of these artificial impositions of state schools and state healthcare and handouts and welfare and this and that and regulations, and you've got to conform to this and that and the other, suddenly you find a lot of the things that people did in the past made sense, pretty reasonable, and most people will stick to them.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is, he would say go full libertarian. I wouldn't go so far as to go to being an anarchist, but I think if we strip back the state to just essentially the principle of justice, maybe the principle of defence, then suddenly we'd have a society that was 10 times or 100 times more traditional than we've got now, where Christianity could have a place, other things could have their place, but without it being imposed on anyone else.
Right, so these are traditional Enlightenment values. What you've expressed is the very philosophical logic that led to multicultural Britain. This idea that we need to strip back the state and let people live their own lives, and then what we do is we create a space where you have your values and your beliefs, and you have your values and your beliefs. And that is exactly the kind of logic that got us into the mess that we're in. Let me finish. Christianity doesn't believe in liberal multiculturalism. We do believe in multi-ethnicity. We do believe in the Catholicity of the church, that the church is for everyone, no matter the language, no matter the cultural expression of Christianity, no matter the ethnicity, but it's not a free-for-all. It's not that you get to have your values and your beliefs even if they contradict the Christian narrative. That is a much more Christian attitude. You see that in Israel. When Israel had the refugees come and live amongst them, they're instructed in the Old Testament not to deny the refugee their rights. But what defined the rights of the refugee? It was the same rights that any Israeli had, any Israeli of the kingdom had. And so rights were defined by the Mosaic Covenant. And likewise, we Christians don't believe in a liberal multiculturalism.
I didn't say multiculturalism.
But your logic leads to multiculturalism because, as you said, we pull back the state, everybody lives their life, but then no one has a particular set of values imposed upon them, and you do your thing, and you do your thing, and and out of that will emerge just a more traditional society.
Literally, because people naturally order themselves. Not everyone here isn't just walking around bumping into each other. People have naturally formed a circle because they all want to
I'm
be
sorry,
fairly
no, I'm
close.
having a conversation, sorry. Thanks be to God. God bless you, brother.
So everyone that's standing around us, they've all ordered themselves by their own choice, right?
Yeah.
They've all done that without someone telling them what to do, without being controlled. They all want to be kind of close so they can hear what's going on, and it's all worked out. I think naturally, if you say, okay, there are two people having a conversation, how are people going to form? Generally like this.
So you want? Do you want tradition? Wait, 1 second. You want, in terms of a traditional society, which traditional society do you want? Do you want a Hindu traditional society where we've got a caste system that has untouchables? Do you want a Islamic traditional society where non-Muslims are denigrated to second-class citizens? Do you want an English or Christian traditional society where we have equality under the law? Or do you want a traditional Jewish society where we have a state for the Jew and the Gentile are just dirty dogs? Which one of those traditional societies do you want?
I'll take English.
What?
English.
So English Christian?
No, English.
All right, do you want a tradition?
Where
1 second.
you can be a Christian.
One second,
if you
one
want
second.
to,
1 second.
And you can be a Christian.
Wait, 1
if
second,
you want
1
to.
second. You see, this is where you don't get what traditional English is. Because are we talking about traditional pagan English society, which leads to the genocide of the Celts? Am I right?
They didn't genocide.
Yes, they did.
They did not. They're still here.
Or we wiped them out, bro.
We're part Celtic,
No, in fact,
yes, through rape and through holding them as slaves. Yeah, the traditional pagan English were a people that wiped out the indigenous Britons of these islands in the 4th century.
Conquered and merged.
Yeah.
Yes, conquered and merged. Yes, we destroyed their culture and then we merged them into a Saxon culture. Is that the traditional English society you want? Or do you want the one that was civilized by the Christian faith?
When you say that, if you actually look at the Celtic cultures being wiped out, you see that happening under the Normans, who are meant to be these
No, by that point the English had already done the damage. You don't know the history.
I do know the history.
Anglo-Saxons came over when?
In the 5th century.
4th century. It's around when the Romans left.
Yeah, when the Romans...
Right. When did the Normans come over?
Well, that was 1066.
Exactly. So the destruction of the Celtic culture had occurred centuries before the Normans arrived. The Normans destroyed Anglo-Saxon culture, particularly in the north of England, because the north of England kept rising up in Saxon revolution, the harrowing of the north. So that's where the Normans destroyed Saxon culture. So my point to you is, you don't know the history as well as you think you do.
I don't... You can keep telling me I don't know the history.
As well as you think you do.
You're not asking me much of the history, right? The Marcher Lords went in, conquered a lot of Wales slowly over time. You had Edward I come in, build his iron ring of castles around Wales. Okay, Wales was completely controlled and taken over.
Yeah.
Right? You had him go up, try and be the Hammer of Scots. That did not work sufficiently. Right? You also, not long after the Norman conquest, within a couple of hundred years, you had Norman lords going over to Ireland and conquering as much of Ireland as they could, and then they became sort of Norman Irish or Anglo-Norman Irish lords, and that sort of merged together. So the idea that this is some non-Christian thing to go in, take over.
But hold on, because thank you for teeing up my next point, which is that the English nation, as a people, was born out of Alfred the Great's struggle against the Danelaw, against the pagan Norse. So my point being is that Christianity is not the free-for-all that you're suggesting, because the ancient English, the founding pillars of the English nation, understood it to be their Christian duty to roll back the Danelaw, to roll back the Norse pagans, and to convert them to the Christian faith, not to have a free-for-all where the pagans get to be pagans and the Christians get to be Christians and the atheists get to be atheists. So in other words, English Christian culture doesn't lead to the thing that you're aspiring to.
I'm not saying English Christian culture.
Great. I'm glad we've
English culture has had a thread of liberalism all the way through it. If you look at some of the actual laws of Alfred the Great and of some of the kingdoms of the Heptarchy going back, you see we even had restorative justice.
Yeah.
Right. We had trials by jury. Right. That wasn't
Pagan,
just out of
yep.
Christianity. That was pagan.
Yep.
That was our pagan ancestors who brought that. There's a spirit
That
of
goes back
liberalism
5,000 years
that, not perfectly and never perfectly, of course, right? That we can trace all the way back from our pagan ancestors through our Christian ancestors and into today. And I don't think that it's fair to say that Christianity can take the credit for all of the liberal things in our society. I think that, genuinely, I think if you go to an actual free market, and I think this is where a lot of people make a mistake, if you go to a genuine free market, what you find is a lot more people who are subscribing to the modern religions of the state, who are worshipping the state, will come back to Christianity. And you talk about the Enlightenment and it's destroying everything. Well, if the Enlightenment here, and I would argue that the Enlightenment over here was more starting with Locke than, the sort of mid-1700s that a lot of people put it down to with the French.
The French revolutionaries, yeah.
Well,
that was 1790.
Yeah, that was the late 1700s, but you could say their Enlightenment period was arguably starting before its debate.
Yeah.
I think our Enlightenment started earlier. Right, at what point did it all crash? Because it seems that it crashed for me, right, around the First World War, when the state took over everything. Until then, we were going round the world, conquering things, spreading the British Empire, and also spreading Christianity for you guys.
Right, so
under liberalism,
for
hundreds of years.
So let me address that. So firstly, this idea that the British Empire was sort of pro-Christian is actually a bit of a misnomer. Yes, they were generally sympathetic to the Christian worldview, but wherever the activities of the church caused problems for the empire, they restricted the activities of missionaries, like they did in Nigeria, like they did in Sudan, like they did in India. They regularly would restrict the activities of missionaries so that those missionaries didn't end up creating a revolution or creating some counter-British movement. And so what they did is they were often actually against the work of the church, which demonstrates that the British had stopped being Christian at some point prior to the expansion of the British Empire. When did that occur? It occurred at the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment is when we take the scaffolding of Christianity and we construct the world in a different frame, in a different narrative to the Christian worldview. Let me give you some examples just to back up my point. So church identity is replaced by individualism or national identity. Rationalism and empiricism as epistemology replaces revelation and reason as epistemology. The idea of the nation state replaces Christendom as the overarching narrative of our politics. Let me give you another one. The idea that the Parliament is the highest sovereign rather than the revelation of God, however it is communicated, is the highest authority. In all of these ways, we restructure society in a way that is antichrist. And the United Kingdom and all of its empire was antichrist, even though large sections of it were sympathetic to the Christian faith and were still being influenced by the Christian faith. The idea, one final one, the idea that Christianity was a private matter rather than a matter of public policy. And you see that about the mid 1800s, the late 1800s. So you get this de-Christianization of Britain even before the First World War. The Crimean War is an example par excellence of the apostasy and paganism and idolatry of the British Empire, fighting against Christians for Muslim oppressors of the church when the Christians were fighting to liberate holy cities like Constantinople.
they be considered heretics in the Orthodox Church?
So, I'm an ecumenical Christian. I don't have to agree with every position of every church. You're correct. Orthodox Christians would have considered Protestant Christians as heretics. I don't think they're right. What I, though, do see is that any truly Christian country would have united with the Russians to overthrow the Turks to set Christians free, and that is exactly what the British and the French did not do at the Crimean War, which predates the First World War.
So you're saying that because religion isn't the primary policy of government and empire, that makes the entire empire completely unchristian and heretical?
No.
Because you just said for hundreds of years we were heretical. And
No, I didn't say that.
Well, you said the British Empire became heretical before.
I didn't say that either.
Okay,
What I said was,
did you become heretical?
so what I said was that the British Empire stopped being Christian. And I also said, which you didn't take on board, is the idea that there were still lots of people within the British Empire that had a lot of sympathy for Christianity. And so, your thesis, your argument that the British Empire was a Christian empire is false. Your thesis that it all went wrong at World War I is false. It actually happens much earlier in our history.
Then why was everything going so well?
Well, the fact that something, what do we define as going well? Fighting against the church? That's certainly not going well.
I'd say you had the biggest expansion of Christianity that you'd seen for centuries, because
Correct.
Christianity was being brought all around the world, and you're taking this, and that is the point at which you're going to call
the schism that went wrong.
this country non-Christian. Sorry, I said heretical. I was using that as a synonym for non-Christian. If you want to be technical, that's fine. That's fine.
I am going to be technical,
It's a technical term.
We're having an academic conversation, so let's be academic with our terms.
I accept that. So you're saying that the empire became non-Christian, but it was clearly quite good for Christians. Also,
yes.
Sometimes when missionaries were going into certain countries, because that's how you started justifying this.
Yeah.
When they were going into certain countries, that was actually provoking wars. It was provoking the rulers of those countries to
Like the Boxer Rebellion.
Yeah, could we endlessly go to war because we had to allow missionaries to go into other countries? Could we endlessly do that?
Also ending slavery.
Right, so hold on one second. Christians sadly have had to be constantly at war. From the time of the conversion of the Roman Empire up until about 1914, we've consistently had armies attack Christians. Even today, we have Islamist armies attacking Christian communities, like they are doing in North Nigeria, like they are doing in Sudan, like they are doing in Syria, like they are doing in Lebanon, like they are doing in Pakistan. And in some of those places, Christians are having to take up weapons to defend themselves. Now, and the point is, Christians have the right to defend themselves against those that persecute them and seek to destroy them. The British Empire, if it was truly a Christian empire, would fight to defend the church. And there were times when it did. Because because when one civilization, what's your name, Richard? Wilzi. When one civilization replaces another civilization, it doesn't happen overnight. The way we should think about civilizational replacement is that one civilization starts to thin out, and as that civilization is thinning out, another civilization starts to thicken to replace it. And so what we see in the 1800s is a kind of 50-50, a half Christian, half enlightened kind of world, where sometimes the British Empire acts as a Christian empire, and sometimes it acts as an anti-Christian empire. And then by about 1945, it ceases to be Christian at all.
I would say when you've got that liberalism coming in, I think you have to make pragmatic decisions. We were fighting with the French for how long? I mean, we've got the 100 Years' War, which was over 100 years, but there were breaks, right? Throughout the whole of our history, our country's been fighting with other Christian countries. So the argument to say us going to war with Orthodox, the Orthodox Russia, okay, or any other country in that later time period post-Enlightenment,
Yep.
I don't think that holds enough weight.
Well, what that shows to me is that the church never accomplished the discipleship of Europe, because the discipleship again is a process. It sits on a spectrum. You know, you can be 10% discipled, 25% discipled, 50% discipled, 75% discipled, 95% discipled. And one of the places where the church has consistently failed to disciple the nations is in the sense that a new nationality replaces an old nationality. That when you become Christian, you join a new nation, the people of God. And that replaces your old nation, the English or the French. I consider myself Christian. Always Christian.
So you would reject being English because Christian is, you know, your primary attribute.
Anything where the English have embraced or embodied Christian teaching or values, I'm happy to claim as my own. Anything where the English have rejected Christianity, I reject the English. I would rather see that part of English culture that is connected to the rejection of Christianity die and wither than preserve it. What we should be doing is cultivating a new Christendom. What we should be doing is cultivating a new sense of what it means to be an English Christian.
Can't you just?
I'm guessing somewhere in your family line there's an Anglo-Saxon then, like your mother or your father or your. Yeah. Okay. So in terms of our identity as Englishmen, and bearing in mind you've obviously got some connection to some other ethnicity as well.
Wales.
Right. And clearly something else as well. There's something else in there, obviously.
Oh yeah, I've got. My father's from the West Indies.
Right. So here's the point, bro. Is that the Celtic Welsh, the Caribbean, and the Englishmen all expressed and have expressed their Christianity differently. And none of those ways of expressing Christianity are wrong. And so Christianity unites the English Christian to the Caribbean Christian. And even though we English, we have a kind of dulcet, low tone, introspective understanding of how we express our faith. Like when someone dies, what do? We just stand there silently and we have the silent tear without much wailing. Whereas in the Caribbean, in just as much a Christian way, they wear colours and they dance and they play music. Well, that is just as much an expression of Christianity as our way of expressing Christianity is.
And I think that's fine. However, I see the best solution for both of us, right? You want to spread Christianity, I want to spread nationalist liberalism, right? Where we've got a lovely free market in which, instead of people worshipping. What's yours?
I'll be back. Something else is happening.
Yeah.
Instead of people worshipping the state,
Yeah.
they'll either follow natural law, follow traditions, which may be Christian, may not be Christian, right? But won't be interfering with you. Would you not rather have a society which is a free market in which you can do well and prosper? Or are you going to use the state to enforce your religion?
Right. So to answer your question directly, if I had to choose between the kind of liberal state that you're advocating or an Islamist state, I would choose a liberal state.
Obviously,
Because a liberal state is built on the scaffolding of Christianity. There's a lot to it that has a Christian feel about it. But if I could choose between a new Christendom and the kind of liberal state that you're talking about, I would work for a new Christendom.
Could you not build a new Christendom by getting people to voluntarily follow?
Yeah, but the moment it becomes Christendom, it stops being liberal.
So what rights would you take away from people?
Okay, so what rights would I take away from people? Right, assuming that we're living now in a Christian state.
Assuming you've now got 51% of the population who are Christians.
Adamantly Christian. So I would get rid of abortion. I would stop the whole cult around pride and around LGBTQT politics. I would
when you
I
say
would
stop-
stop I would stop that being taught in schools.
I mean,
I would restrict divorce laws. I would institute that the Sunday could be treated like a Sabbath for those that wanted it like a Sabbath, and your employers couldn't stop you. I would ban casinos. I would ban strip clubs. I would ban all-you-can-eat restaurants. I would ban, because they're just gluttony. It's just encouraging gluttony. I would ban the selling shops that just sell alcohol. They would have to go. Like these are the kinds of things that I would get rid of, amongst some other things as well.
so once you got to 51%, that would be it. You'd be coming after me. If I wanted to
In what
open-
sense do you mean coming after you?
If I wanted to have a nice little, wine shop where I sold some mead as well as wine, and I sold, a few different beers and whatnot.
You'd be able to buy that from a tavern that serves food.
But what if I said I'm not going to do that? Are you going to send the police round? and
No,
lock me up?
but you wouldn't be able to open that kind of business.
What if
Just
I
like,
had it open?
just like, well, those kind of businesses that are already open, you could have a debate about. Like, what you could do is you could allow the people that own those businesses to keep them until they themselves no longer want that business, but then not allow that business to be passed on to someone else. So that what you do is, what I think the best way to do it is this, is allow people who are used to a certain set of rights to keep them until the end of their life, but don't renew them for the next generation. A bit like Rishi Sunak wanted to do with smoking, which I thought was a great idea. He said anyone who grew up in a smoking culture could keep smoking for the rest of their life, but people who are growing up who had never known smoking should never be able to know smoking. And I think that's a good way to do it.
That's a war to the death, I'm afraid. I will never settle for my kids having fewer rights than me. They inherit their rights through me, and to take away their rights is as much as to take away my rights, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, if you're talking about equality before the law, what Sunak did was he went completely against the concept of equality before the law to impose this and say, it's like the jizya, right? Okay? So, you know all about the jizya, right?
Yeah.
Pay your money and you get to keep your old religion, right? Come to Islam when you go broke, but then you can never leave because then you become an apostate. So it's all one way.
Right. So the problem is, look at where your liberalism has got us.
Look at where socialism's got us. This is all big government.
But the point is, liberalism led to socialism. Liberalism, the Enlightenment, led to socialism. Your way of thinking led to the mess that we're in now, and you already gave us one example of that. When you started talking about everybody just have their own religious beliefs. Well, it will roll back the state so that he could be pagan, I could be Christian, and then someone else could be Muslim. That is exactly the kind of logic that led us to the very thing you're now against. Your ideas,
I don't think so,
your
because
ideas.
mass
Wait, I'm
migration-
going to finish my point. Your ideas led us to this problem. The reason why the English person, the English man and woman, has a substance abuse problem is because of liberalism. Because we have this idea of you should be free to destroy your life through alcoholism. You should be free to destroy your life through substance abuse. Would you legalize cocaine?
I believe cocaine's already legal as a natural right.
There you go.
It's our right to rack up lines, take as much as we like,
in the black
so
market,
long
it's
as you
worse.
don't push that on kids. Okay.
And do you believe in abortion? Would you allow abortion to continue?
I believe once consciousness develops, no.
So yes, before consciousness.
I'm talking about 5 weeks after.
So
5
thank
weeks
you.
after gestation.
Yes, before consciousness. So you are in favour of abortion. Would you allow divorce to be a laissez-faire, liberal event where someone decides, right, I want a divorce, this is not working for me, I want to move on with my life?
I don't believe the state should be involved with marriage.
Exactly. So my point is, you've demonstrated to me, at least, and hopefully to a lot of your Chad audience, that your belief system leads directly to the mess that the English people are in. You're in favour of substance abuse, you're in favour of abortion, you're in favour of divorce, you're in favour of gambling. You're in favour of everything killing the English.
Amen.
No, I'm in favour
Yes.
of people's right to choose whether they want to do something that harms themselves.
Exactly.
Are you saying you've never gone into a shop, seen a chocolate bar or something unhealthy, and had it?
Bro, if you can imagine a sin, the chances are I've done it.
Okay, so
right?
you
So,
know,
but the point is,
do
one
you
second.
believe that I have the right to use violence against you if you go and eat something unhealthy? That's mental. I have no right to use violence against you because you have rights.
Why
Your
are you
fundamental
putting words
rights.
into my mouth?
Because you're talking
Where,
about
where,
real
have,
estate power.
where have I ever said that we should use violence against you?
You said you would ban this.
Yes, banning something is not the same as using violence. Be more accurate with your words.
I will disagree.
Right, one second. No, I'm going to make my point. I'm going to make my point. I'm going to make my point. So you have demonstrated again that liberalism leads to the degeneracy that you're against. Because you're saying that you're in favour of the individual's right to fuck up their lives with substance abuse, to destroy their family through abortion, to destroy their family through divorce, to destroy their family through making choices in a laissez-faire way. So in other words, you have demonstrated the proof of my critique that your values, your doctrines destroy the West, and that actually Christianity can save people like you and can save the West from people like you.
How are you going
such a
to
red herring.
enforce
Your
what you
Chad
want?
liberalism
How are you
is
going
a
to
cancer.
enforce it? How are you going to enforce? If you're going to ban people from smoking, how are you going to enforce it if you're not going to use violence? Are you going to say, oh, you can't do that? Well, do you know what? You can do that under a liberal system. You can go around telling people, don't do this, don't do that. If you're going to stop me from opening a wine shop, how are you going to enforce that if you're not going to use violence? How
Right, so let me explain
are you
that.
Just pray at me?
So let me explain that. So the question is, how do we bring about a discipling of society and culture that is towards Christ and not towards the worship of individualism and the self?
No, it's how are you
So
going
no,
to
I'm going
ban
to
the
answer your
specific things
question.
you said to ban?
I'm going to answer your question, because what we are talking about, whether you recognize it or not, Wilzi, is whether we disciple society towards the worship of self or towards the worship and following of Christ. Now, you know and I know that not all laws are criminal laws. There are such things as civil law. And so when it comes to, I'll tell you, we'll use the wine shop example. What you do is, you pass a law that says no new wine shops can open. If you own a wine shop, the state will not shut that shop down.
I start a new one?
But when you die and that shop no longer belongs to you, even though you might be able to pass on the premises to your children, you can't pass on the business to your children. They have to use it in some other way.
And how are you
And
going to
that,
enforce
and that,
How?
well, you would enforce it through civil law.
How?
So if someone tried to continue to sell alcohol in a wine shop, you would fine them
How are you going to do that? How are you going to take their money?
through
if they say no?
arresting them, taking to court,
So
prosecuting
you're
them.
going to violently take them, you're going to lock them in a box. If they say no, if you come
Yeah.
up to them and say, give me some money, and they
Okay,
say
if
no,
this is your
you're
definition,
going to use violence.
if this is your definition of violence, which is
Yes.
the proper application of law,
Violence is a
then yes, we are talking
all-
about violence.
all law that you want to enforce.
If that is our
Any law,
definition.
even laws I want to enforce are based on
Bro,
violence.
you're not
If
educating me on anything right now.
Yeah,
I
if-
understand
if-
what you're
if I wanna
saying,
stop theft
but we
based on
just-
violence.
Yes, you're not educating me on anything. If that is the definition of violence that we're using, then yes, we're talking about using violence, right? But I would just call using law, right? So this is the way that you do it.
So violence.
Yes, through law.
I believe that's absolutely horrible. And also, you said that my system comes out of. You said my system comes out of the Enlightenment. Right?
Does.
And my system is liberalism, right?
It is.
And now we're in socialism.
No, we're not.
We're in state controlling half of the means of production.
No, we're still in liberalism.
the state controls half of everything.
Maybe neoliberalism.
Yeah, right. So what? Let's be clear about our term of liberalism, because we are using it slightly differently. When I talk about liberalism, I am talking about Enlightenment liberalism. Now, the politics.
British or
When
continental?
you're talking about both, when you're talking about liberalism, you're talking about a particular stream of political thought. But for me, your stream of political thought is as much liberal humanism as the socialist, or as the Nazi, or as the communist. There's no difference, from my perspective, between your philosophical grounding and the grounding of a communist, a Nazi, or a socialist.
They don't believe in property. I believe in property. I believe you own yourself. I believe you have rights over yourself. They believe they have rights over you. I think you're most aligned with the Nazis and the communists because you believe you have rights over my business or my children's business or my life, and you get to ban me, or if not me, then you get to ban future generations. I don't believe that you get to ban people from doing what they want with their own property. So I see you as altogether as the authoritarians. You are the left.
Right, so let me answer that question. Because the reality is all you're doing is expressing humanism through individualism and then governing your politics through the ideas of individualism. All a communist, a fascist, or a Nazi are doing is expressing humanism through collectivism and then governing their politics through collectivism. Now,
What do you mean by humanism?
now, let me explain where I'm coming from. As a Christian, I believe in the covenant people of God, the church. And I believe that that church is the body of Christ. You've just dropped something. Thank you.
So do you mind if I just quickly change that?
Yeah, change your battery.
Oh my God, 1% again. Oh well, listen, I'm enjoying this.
I'm enjoying it too. This is how Speaker's Corner is supposed to be.
I'm trying to give you the coconut water.
Sorry?
I'm trying to give you coconut water.
Oh, thank you. I'll take the coconut water next.
Okay. You have to use speech or you still
I'm going to talk with him, and then I'm going to do a couple of talks.
very tired.
Yeah,
May I ask you a favour? Do you mind if I smoke during this?
go for it.
He has the right to smoke.
Right. So, are we now rolling again?
You were in your point, sorry for
Yeah.
interrupting.
So the point is, what I'm offering is something different from humanism, and humanism is what I'm saying liberalism is. What I'm offering is something different. Now, it may work out that it looks like something else, but joining the covenant people of God, becoming part of the church, means that you join the body of Christ, and that you seek to organize society according to revelation as expressed through rational thought. And so, as Christians, we believe that society should, at points, have collective ideals, collective traditions, collective customs. And where those collective ideals and customs restrict the liberty of the individual, that is a good thing. It is a good thing that we can protect the alcoholic or those with the predication to substance abuse from destroying their lives through substance abuse. It is a good thing that we can close down strip clubs. It is a good thing that we can stop people from destroying their own lives because of rampant individualism. Do you understand the point that I'm making?
I understand the point you're making. How do you stop that power from being abused?
Well, the point is, with any political system, there's always the potential of abuse. The Christians, however, have something within our worldview that is a warner, a constant counsel against political tyranny, which is the sinfulness of man. Because Christians believe in the sinfulness of man, we recognize that man will destroy any system, even a Christian one, will distort any system, even a Christian one. And so as Christians, we have this counsel which, if we listen to it, advises us, warns us to watch out for where we are corrupting our own system. But liberalism doesn't have that, because liberalism believes in the intrinsic goodness of man and his ability to reason. Let me ask you, do you believe in the intrinsic goodness of man and his ability to reason?
Which one?
What do you mean, which
Do you
one?
mean both at the same time? The inherent goodness of man. No, I don't believe man is inherently good.
Okay.
I believe man has the potential. So I agree with some Christian teaching on this, right? I believe man has both the capacity for good and evil. So it depends how you interpret original sin, whether you consider it a Christian thing. Some Christians interpret original sin to be man is born with the spark of God. He's also born with this taint of original sin. He's born with both good and evil in him. I believe man is born with both good and evil in him. That's why I believe that we must have a state. That's why I'm not an anarchist. I believe we must have a state, and the function of the state is justice. Right?
Yeah, I agree. You got that straight out of the Christian playbook.
However, saying that everything needs to be dictated by Christ, saying that we must be controlled by Christ, is
Discipled in the way of Christ is what I actually said. Is what I actually said.
Discipled is opening everything up to abuse, because the incentives, once you have this power structure, once you put power in the hands of a monopolist, right, who are the people who are going to rise to the top? Even if the people who entered this power structure, right, had your best interests at heart, they still have a level of incompetence. They still are not going to feel the effects the same as you. The best person to make decisions about your life is you, okay? Because you face the consequences of your own actions. The best person to take decisions about my life is me, because I will face the consequences of my own actions. And also, there are psychopaths. You might see them as sinners or demons or devils, right, within our society. Okay, those are the people. Once you create this great burgeoning state, this great power structure, which has destroyed, right, our society in the last 100 years, especially this big state. Right, once you create that, who are the people that go to the top? Who are the politicians we've got now? They're evil people and saying, we're going to have Christians and the Christians are going to be good. You've just said yourself that this system will crumble. I think your system is going to be taken over straight away, because you're giving that power away from the individual, and they don't have the power to fight back. With a power to fight back, with a right to bear arms, with free speech, with fundamental limits on government, and really severe limits on government, we actually have the opportunity to fight back and push back with our
So let me reply.
And if you believe you're in the right, then you should be able to win on an equal playing field. You should be able to
allow me to
persuade people
reply.
and bring people, and God should move with you. If you genuinely believe God's going to help you, God should move with you, and God should help you win over every person here.
So allow me to reply. So the problem, the idea of a limited government, is a Christian idea again. So once again, you're borrowing from Christianity to marshal your arguments, but all your best arguments are actually Christian arguments. The idea, remember, the Magna Carta and the restriction on the authority of the king is a Christian idea. And just as an example that it predates England, you had the same thing with the Bishop Ambrose and Emperor Justinian II, where Emperor Justinian II decimated Thessaloniki because of a revolt and a rebellion. And Bishop Ambrose, for that injustice, excommunicated the emperor, thus demonstrating that as far back as Roman times, Christians believed in the limits of the secular state, and it predates, and it is something that is not unique to the English. Now, let me continue. The point of the matter is that your idea, your faith in individualism, your quasi-religious cultic faith in individualism fails to understand a few things. Number one, the very concept of individual identity was cultivated through Christian spirituality. In what way? One, because of baptism. The idea that when you were baptized, you would separate from your tribe, and thus you would create an identity distinct from the nation that you came from. Two, the idea of confession. The idea that you, Wilzi, would confess your sins individually to a priest. meaning the idea of personal responsibility was cultivated through Christian spirituality. But when you emphasize that to the exclusion of everything else that frames it, i.e. the idea of collective identity in the body of Christ, under the tutelage of Christ, you end up with the very world that we're living in. You're living in your world. This is the world that you want. The idea of individualism. The problem with individualism is that you don't like the choices that the individuals have made. Because Wilzi, let me finish. Wilzi, let me finish without interruption. You're sulking because the individuals decided that they preferred cultural Marxism over your philosophical liberalism.
They can go do that.
But that is their choice. And they have used, so there you go. What you want to do is you want to restrict other people's choices because you don't agree with the choices that they've made.
Over my life and the life of other people who don't consent. Yes, I happily agree to that. However, what I derive my morality from is reason, and you would say that God gives you reason.
Yes.
So if God gives you reason, right, and reason tells you that it harms people, it harms a society, and it is a negative, and it is dangerous. It's fundamentally dangerous to invest a government with power to tell people what they can and can't take, what they can and can't say, blasphemy laws, right? Telling people what days they can and can't work, or can and can't go on recreation. Right? If you were to invest a state with this level of power, reason, I believe, and evidence that we've seen throughout the whole of human history shows that this is fundamentally dangerous, fundamentally wrong. And I think that your God, and you being a Christian, you should embrace liberalism, because that is what, if you are a Christian, you should believe in. You should believe in natural law, because the difference between us, and this is what I see as what should be the difference between us, right, is, for me, reason is the highest thing, and I use that to find natural law. I use that to find morality. I use that to see that, you know, if that man there were to punch this other man, that would be wrong. That would be harming an innocent person. I can see right and wrong through my reason. The only difference that should exist between the two of us is that you should say, well, that reason comes from my God.
Right.
And that's the only difference that should exist between us.
Can I reply?
I want you to continue being a Christian.
Can I reply?
But to come over to liberalism so we can fight together for liberalism. We can fight for these restrictions.
Can I reply?
On the same.
Right. Me and you are not on the same side. You are anti-Christ and you are against the church. And so me and you are enemies, ideologically speaking. That doesn't mean that I hate you, because as Christians we're called to love our enemies and to bless those that would persecute us. But let's be clear. We Christians don't believe that reason stands on its own. We believe that reason works in synergy and in synthesis with revelation. We reason from revelation to guide us in making choices, both collectively and individually. But furthermore, there seems to be a dichotomy of thought, because you're talking in terms of right and wrong, but unless you believe in God, there's no grounding for that belief. You have no basis to talk about right and wrong, because right and wrong depends upon truth, and truth depends upon a supernatural being. It doesn't exist independent of metaphysics. If you don't believe in God, then all you have is a natural world. And that natural world is cold, uncaring, and has no metaphysics. It is simply chemical fuzz in the brain, electrical signals, no meaning, no right, no wrong, no truth, no false. Let me finish. If you don't have God at the basis of your system, then you're living in cognitive dissonance, because you're trying to assert two contradictory things. You're trying to say that there is meaning, there is right, there is wrong, there is truth, there is falsehood, there is good, there is bad, but then you're trying to say all we have is chemical fuzz and electrical signals and a random universe that has no caring about it, that we can explain the mechanics of, but doesn't apply meaning to?
I think there's caring. I think in societies where there is no Christianity whatsoever and Christianity's never touched them,
You've missed my point.
They're still going to be caring.
You've missed my point entirely.
I think we feel good and bad in our brains.
We feel good and bad in our brains. Thank you. It's chemical fuzz. It's electronic signals. It's totally subjective, isn't it?
No, it's not just subjective. You can feel. You can feel if this worm were to hurt you,
Yes.
you would be able to feel that.
exists.
And I would be able to see via empiricism, right, which you may criticize. I'd be able to see that's wrong. And you
No,
do
stop.
that.
Hold on one second.
You acknowledge this as an
That's a
aspect.
false
But then
connection.
you limit it, and you shouldn't be limiting it. Because really, you know that the Bible is not perfect.
Right. So your premise doesn't lead to your conclusion. You've said that if someone struck this brother, right, that would be wrong, right? And you said you could know that empirically. Empiricism, if you actually are clear about what empiricism is simply the description of the force and the energy by which one person strikes another, and the expression mathematically of the geometry of the strike. It doesn't say whether the strike was right or wrong. You need to appeal to something else other than empiricism to say whether the strike was right or wrong. Because what happens if someone struck me, but the reason why they struck me is because I just defrauded their grandmother of their entire life savings and left her homeless in the street?
In which case, you wouldn't be conducting as much empiricism as would be needed in the scenario. So when we need more empiricism in order to solve it,
But
you feel
you're
pain.
still missing my main point.
You feel pain.
Yes.
You feel suffering.
Yes.
Right? How do you know you feel pain? You can feel it.
Yeah.
So that's empirical. And I can feel pain. I can feel suffering. I can
But
feel
what makes your
pleasure.
suffering
I can
right
feel
or
joy.
wrong?
It's whether it's caused by another person, and we can objectively see that in the world.
Hold on
we
one
can
second.
look at how to maximise this.
Whether it's committed by another person, but what makes someone else causing you pain wrong?
Because I own myself. Because
No.
what maximises
What? Hold on one
prosperity-
second. On what grounds are you basing this idea that you own yourself?
I'm basing it off of natural law because
Stop. In every point, Wilzi,
utilitarianism is what I'm trying to tell you.
right, so we can get to utilitarianism straight away. You can just say the problem with utilitarianism is that utilitarianism is trying to apply meaning to the world that the world itself doesn't suggest the world has.
My experience of the world, as your experience of the world, is that you can feel pain, you can feel pleasure, right? That is within our experience. That is an empirical observation.
But our
on the world.
experience doesn't teach us that we own ourselves. Our experience teaches us that we always belong to someone else.
But
Let
we
me
can
give you an
feel that
example.
Bad is bad. We can feel pain is bad.
No, you never own yourself experientially. You never own yourself
I'm not
experientially.
saying you own yourself experientially.
Right,
the best way to
but
maximise
you
good in
try
the
to
world.
justify you experientially. You're trying to appeal to You're trying to appeal to empiricism via experientialism, but experientialism and empiricism don't agree, because experientialism and empiricism, when you look at empiricism, it makes no comment on whether you own yourself or not. But experientialism tells you that when you were a child, your family owned you. And when you were an adult, society owns you. Because society gets to tell you what you can and can't do, and there's not jack shit you can do about it. And so society tells you what you can do with your life.
But that's not a normative argument.
But it's true, isn't it? Does society get to tell us what we can and can't do with our lives?
Does society tell us?
Yes.
Yes, it does tell us.
Brilliant.
I think that's bad.
Brilliant. So we don't get to own ourselves, do we?
That's not a normative argument.
Right, it is a normative argument. It's a perfectly sound
we do
argument.
get to own ourselves to some degree.
In the way that society allows us.
But that's not a normative. The whole conversation is normative. It's about
Right.
morals.
But
We're
it-
not making a normative argument.
My point is that there is no grounds from atheistic worldview, from atheistic materialism, that you can get to any meaning, truth, or value. And so you cannot talk in meaning, truth, or value if your worldview has as one of its foundation stones materialism, materialistic atheism.
Well, it depends what you mean by materialism, materialistic atheism.
I'll tell you exactly what I mean by it.
But first, I would like to say, you can feel good and bad. I can feel good and bad.
No, hold on.
What I'm talking about is
what grounds the good and bad?
What grounds it? I can feel it.
But
you
what?
Can feel it.
No.
We know that these
No,
feelings exist.
those
and we know
those
that
feelings.
We know that good is good because it feels good. We
There-
can feel the positivity of it.
there are people-
We can feel the pleasure of it.
there are
and we can feel
people-
the evil as well. And we need to weigh that up against other people and think, okay, how do we maximise this? How do we maximise this for everyone in the world? And the way you
Animals understand
maximise
reciprocity.
it is by allowing people to be individuals. Because, as I said a while back, you're the best person to make decisions about your life.
Not always.
Even if someone else, right? could
No. Have you
possibly-
ever received good advice from a friend?
Yes.
And has that influenced your decision?
Yes.
Okay. So sometimes other people see better than you, don't they?
But I wouldn't hand myself over as a slave to someone
would
else.
you agree-
because that, on
one
the
second,
whole, would be
Wilzi.
negative, because they could use
Wilzi.
that. They would have no.
Would you
incentive
agree-
structured
would you
to
agree,
care for me.
Wilzi?
I have the incentive to.
Okay,
care
this
for myself.
conversation's starting to break down. Wilzi, would you agree that sometimes other people see better your circumstance than you do?
I agree.
Right. So there is actually, if we were having a genuinely good society, we would have a society that has an interaction between the individual's personal choices and good counselors.
Yes, voluntary.
Right. And within the church, that is exactly what we practice. We have spiritual directors, we have fathers of confession or mothers of confession that we go to seek spiritual advice and spiritual counsel. And so our individual autonomy is lived out within collectivism. It's not a radical individual autonomy because we do submit to authority. We submit to the authority of the church. We submit to the authority of Scripture. We submit to the authority of our elders. So my point to you is that in terms of living out a healthy autonomy, in terms of living out, you've got a bad cameraman here. The guy's got like ADHD, doesn't have any concentrational ability. In terms of living out individual autonomy, we Christians live it out in a far more responsible, far more well thought out way than your philosophy leads you to.
I think what you're doing is going down a really dangerous route, because even if you saw someone who may know better, they don't have that inherent incentive to make the right decision for your life. And also, if you were to enslave yourself to someone else, then that gives a person a power, and a power that can be corrupted. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. You don't want to give someone absolute power.
We agree.
And in addition, you've talked about having all of these different structures within a society.
The church.
The church, the scripture. Well, you just said you're a person who doesn't necessarily have to follow a different church, follow a certain church, right? So which church is that? Which is going to have primacy? Is it going to be the elders? Is it going to be the church? Is it going to be the scripture? Or the fourth one, which you mentioned before, which you left out, is reason. I think you know that the Bible is imperfect because it's a series of testaments, it's a series of witness testimonies, and also things handed down through
It's more than that.
oral tradition, right? But you believe it's divinely inspired, it's describing divine.
Have you got a Bible?
I'm not sure.
Right. At the end, I'd like to give you a gift, and it will be a Bible.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
international one.
you've got all four of these. However, the Bible itself, you know, is imperfect. The elders, you know, are imperfect. The church, you know, it can be imperfect. I think.
I also know that I am imperfect.
Yes.
And
But out of all of these, which do you believe has your best interest? Which has the best incentive to do best by you?
So, in terms of your question, obviously human beings, all individuals, always look for their own best interest. But the problem, because I am imperfect, is I can't always recognize what is in my best interests. I am not always in full control of my own urges. I am not always fully autonomous, even as an individual, because I am subject to psychological predications based on childhood traumas or based on other things that have gone on in my life, or my lack of education, or my lack of economy. And so this idea that just handing over all power to the individual is the way to best govern society is naive, it's extreme, and it is fundamentalist. It's fanatical, and it leads to distortions, it leads to the chaos of the world that we live in, and it leads to the destruction of lives. I believe that individual autonomy should sit within the family unit, and the family unit should sit within the congregational unit, and the congregational unit should sit within the wider body of Christ, and that wider body of Christ should govern the government, and by governing the government, create laws to the benefit of the wider body of Christ, the congregations that make it up, the families that make up those congregations, and thus by doing that, the individuals that make up those families.
And you can say that, but at the end of the day, bad people will rise to the top.
And that also is true in a laissez-faire free market society.
No, because
yes,
because what happens is you may have your own self-interest at heart, but then there are other people who have control of themselves who are able to defend themselves. That's wonderful when you've got a society in which people can defend themselves, and you have this limit of justice. You can do whatever you like. You can make lots of mistakes, and you can learn from those mistakes. You're allowed to make your own mistakes.
Yes.
You can make your mistakes. You can learn from them. When
you can make mistakes in a Christian worldview as well. We call it sin, and we go to those to whom we are spiritually accountable, and we seek to learn from our mistakes.
But you also believe in using violence against people.
So do you.
Only to defend people.
So you're saying on one hand you don't believe in anarchy, but then on the other hand you're saying to me you're against me because I believe in the use of law to advance what is good and to restrict what is evil, but yet you would also use law to advance what you think is good and restrict what is evil.
No, what I would...
You wouldn't. So you wouldn't use law against the Islamists?
No, I define between law and diktat. Okay, so there is law which reason can derive, and there is diktat, which is just expressing your preferences and forcing your preferences on someone else.
But I'm sorry, you're mischaracterizing my position consistently.
I simply want to enforce people's rights. Okay, I don't want to.
Who defines those rights?
Or even if I felt like forcing.
Who defines those rights?
Reason, and I think by
rationalism,
by bringing in the elders, the church, right, everything else, and putting that ahead of your reason, I think you are moving away from your God.
So Wilzi, you don't know enough about Christianity to make that statement. Have some intellectual humility, because you blatantly don't know enough about Christianity. But you also don't know enough about the history of rationalism either, because the rights that emerged out of the Enlightenment and out of the rationalist thinkers, Wilzi, don't interrupt. The rights that emerged out of the Enlightenment by people like John Locke, for instance, those rights emerged out of the reflection of the Reformation Wars. They didn't emerge because rationalism just worked in isolation in a neutral stasis chamber, and then we just somehow magically invented rights in a vacuum using reason. That is not what happened in history. The rights that were advocated from the Enlightenment were done out of retrospect, reaction and contrast to the experience of the Reformation Wars. That was the context in which those rights emerged. The point that I'm making to you is that you can't just use rights in a vacuum, you can't just use reason in a vacuum to achieve anything, because reason is just a methodology of thought. It doesn't give you premises, doesn't give you assumptions, it doesn't give you a foundation. It is simply a way of thinking from another foundation, from another set of premises, from another set of conditions. And so when you try to argue that we can use reason to come up with rights, it tells me that you don't know the history of rationalism.
I think what you're doing is you're conflating the continental enlightenment with the British one, and I think because of that, it's very difficult to argue because you're sort of merging everything together. And I think this is a major historical problem that people don't differentiate between the two.
There was Reformation wars in England.
Yes, I agree. That's a major attribute, and also there's a thread of liberalism running back all the way to our pagan, through the Magna Carta, through the.
You're just making up history now.
Well, how comes we had our revolution in 1215?
It's got nothing to do with paganism. Don't just repeat his talking points without checking them. The pagans weren't liberals.
I'm not
Anglo-Saxon pagans were not liberals.
I'm saying a thread. I didn't say
Not
a whole tapestry.
Anglo-Saxon pagans were not liberals. You simply are just repeating his parrot point.
I'm not saying they were complete liberals.
You
I'm
have
saying
no
there was a
idea
thread,
when you.
not a tapestry.
And my point to you is, I agree with you in terms of Christianity. You can trace out something that then becomes Western liberalism, because Western liberalism wasn't born in a vacuum. It was born in a Christendom, and it was born out of Christendom, and it uses Christian scaffolding, which is why I've pointed out that all of your best points that you've made in this conversation are actually Christian points. The idea of limiting government, the idea. No, you see, there you're characterising me because you haven't been listening to what I've been saying. One second. The fact, Wilzi, that you have not listened carefully to what I've been saying is your problem. You need to go back to your badly shot video and you need to re-listen carefully to what I'm saying, because I gave you examples, Christian examples, of limiting government, both in English history and before English history, that showed that the church believed in limiting government, in limiting the power of government, even in limiting the power of the church, because most Christians rejected papal authority. They didn't believe that the Pope was the singular authority of the church. They believed that each bishop was in control of his own diocese and had no power over another bishop in another diocese. So the church believed in the limiting of secular government and in the limiting of church government. And even the Pope had limited government, because the Pope could be and was living in a symbiotic relationship with the secular authority, and the secular authority could limit the activities of the Pope in secular affairs. So the idea of limited government is an intrinsically Christian idea. The individualism that you're trying to build your entire philosophy on is connected to Christian spirituality. The idea of the rights and of good and bad and of true and false are based on Christian metaphysics. All of the best bits of your philosophy you've just picked out like lettuce leaves from a salad, from the Christian salad, but you've left out the rest of the nutrition. You've left the peppers, you've left the tomatoes, you've left the olives, you've left the feta cheese, you've left the chicken, and all you've got are lettuce leaves. You can't have a healthy worldview from the scraps of another worldview. And with that, I'm going to let you have the final word, and then we can bring this to a close, and I'm going to go and do something else.
All I can say is I think it's been a fantastic debate. I would like to speak to you at some point, and you can outline where, if you do believe in intrusions into people's private lives, how you could ever practically limit government. Because I think when you look at governments through the past, you see that whenever government intrudes into people's private lives, it goes wrong and it's harmful on the whole. And I hope that you can focus on the primacy of your reason. And I hope that you can outline how your system's going to work, which one's going to have control. Because I see so much room for abuse. But I've got to say, it's been a pleasure.
It really has, Wilzi. Let me give you a gift. I always give a gift to someone that I've enjoyed having a conversation with. Here you go, bro. That's a Bible for you. And here's a point, right? We've just talked for maybe 2 hours about English culture, right? The King James Bible is a monument to the English language, of English prose, and of how beautiful the English language can be. And this book, along with the Book of Common Prayer, normalize the grammatical structures of the English language, thus demonstrating that even the very language which we have communicated by has been cast and fashioned and formed by the Christian faith, which just goes to show how deeply penetrative Christianity has been upon everything that we think of as English. So that's my gift to you. Enjoy it.
And it just lost
Right.
power at the same
You
time.
look after yourself. God bless.